On behalf of the Democrats Abroad Global Black Caucus, I'd like to welcome everyone. Good morning, good afternoon, and good evening to our guests, to our Democrats Abroad members, and to all of you who have joined this call from all around the world. My name is Lidano Jasmore, your DA, Global Black Caucus Chair and DPCA voting rep for Democrats Abroad Switzerland and a Texas voter. And I encourage you all to not lose any time and register to vote. Our democracy is definitely counting on all of you, each and every one of you, and not just you, your family members and friends too. Welcome to today's Critical Race Theory Beginners Session with our distinguished guest, Gina Harris, who we already have had the absolute pleasure in working alongside during previous Democrats Abroad Global Black Caucus events. For those of you who aren't familiar with us, Democrats Abroad is the largest organization of US citizens outside of the United States, and we are also an official arm of the Democratic Party. It's our mission to provide Americans abroad a voice in our government and elect Democratic candidates by mobilizing the overseas vote. There's so much at stake this year, you simply cannot imagine if you see those numbers, but it definitely is true. 34 US Senate seats, all 435 US representative seats, 46 state legislators, and 36 state governorships are up for the grabs in November 2022. Offices where the decisions that impact your and your family's day-to-day lives are made. Offices where decisions on climate justice, reproductive rights, affordable education and healthcare, and so much more are made. But before we kick off today's event, allow me to lay down some simple information and some few basic Zoom room etiquette rules. We are recording this session. If you do not agree with being filmed, please turn your camera off. Please keep your microphones muted when you're not speaking. And during the Q&A session, please type ** hands up into the chat box so we can cue people speaking. We ask you to please not interrupt people mid-sentence while they are speaking. Democrats Abroad is a volunteer-driven organization. We have a critical year in front of us with federal, state, and local elections. We absolutely must win. Please help us register Americans all over the world for the 2022 midterm elections. And the easiest way to make a contribution is to visit democratsabroad.org/donate. There's a link in the chat box. If you feel like you want to donate a little bit so that we can get out the vote, please help us do. We simply cannot win without you. Please also consider stepping up as a volunteer. We really do need all hands on deck. In the forefront, in the background, we need every single person out there. We need you, our brothers and sisters need you, and our country needs you. You can be our future. To become a volunteer, please follow the link in the chat box, democratsabroad.org, Caucus positions. And last but not least, I encourage you to share the knowledge of this session with your family, friends, coworkers, or even the stranger on the park bench. Critical race theory. Critical race theory anyway. What is that anyway? We have been inundated with the term with a lack of understanding of what it truly means. During our session, we will review norms for having challenging conversations around race, the various levels of racism, breaking down the barriers to discussion and understanding why it is critical that we teach and discuss accurate United States history. We hope you brought your discomfort and questions to this learning space. Without any further ado, it is my greatest pleasure to introduce Gina Harris, who's a National Education Association Black Caucus Treasurer and Human and Civil Rights Committee Chair of the Illinois Education Association. Hi, Gina. Thank you for joining us today. Gina is an educator, peacemaker, and true architect of change. She serves as a state director for the National Education Association and on the school board in her town. Her expertise developing education professionals on racial justice in education and restorative practices has allowed her to work to empower educators and organizations around the country. Gina founded Unity Dialogues, a circle process where students and adults learn from each other and grow from authentic, open dialogue about race and unity development. As a restorative justice practitioner and trainer, Gina utilizes circle processes and communication tools to create environments that break down barriers to communication and encourages open, honest dialogue inside and outside the classroom. Gina, are you ready to bring on critical race theories for beginners.
Totally. I'm so excited to be here. Thank you so much, Jazz. And thank you for that introduction. As you mentioned, I'm an educator. Okay, so I'm a teacher, so you're going to get some teacher stuff today. I'm just warning in advance. I'm also a circle keeper, so I will tend to do things by way of circle. It was the way that I was trained. It's an ancestral practice for me personally, and I find it to be valuable when we have these challenging conversations. So I'm going to share my screen because there's some things I got to go through with you all in order for us to just be in the place to have some challenging and difficult conversations. And let me just say, they are challenging and difficult conversations. So I like to set up our space so that people understand. And I also do want to recognize that a lot of the work that I do is cultivated with two of my colleagues, Jihan Padme and Francis Crafton. We've done a number of things around not only institutionalized racism, systemic oppression, and race in general, and how the isms of the world show up in our classrooms, but we've also done a number of conversations lately around critical race theory, because it seems to be a hot topic right now, in case you haven't noticed. I'm just putting up this wellness circle here that we usually do to make sure that you take care of yourselves in our time today, you know, like wellness and well-being. I also teach meditation and yoga, so wellness and well-being is really important. So take care of yourselves during our time together today. We're working to create a brave, safe space, but just keep in mind the word there is brave. I'm going to invite you into being very uncomfortable, and I'm going to give you some tools for that too. But I'm going to go, I usually tend to push a little bit. I'm very chill and peaceful, but I might give you a little bit of a push. So just be ready for that. But we want to listen actively and exercise respect, and just know that this is a courageous space. Leo, Jazz already mentioned some of the virtual norms, but I just want you to know that like you can, you know, contribute in your own way. If you need to have your camera off because we're recording fine, please keep your mics muted. Use the chat feature openly and freely. I usually keep the chat feature open so that I can see it too. And then if you have something to add, toss it in the chat or raise your hand, either way. And we will, this is truly going to be a discussion and not just, I'm not just pouring out information. This will be some back and forth. So let's start with the circle agreements that we use when we have conversations around race. And I will tell you, it said that I sit on the school board for where I grew up. I said I was elected there, and it's Oak Park, Illinois. We are a progressive community, and we have a lot of imperatives around equity. And there was a special documentary on our district. We had community conversations about the documentary because it really exposed where we are not so really about equity. And we use these agreements and they work. They've worked very well. So I just want to encourage you to stay engaged. When the material gets challenging, it is very easy to pick up your phone and start to scroll. Please just stay engaged as much as you can. Speak your truth, like what's in your heart. I don't speak for all Black women. I don't speak for all of anyone. No one has, and all women, no one has given me the opportunity. No one has said, you are the speaker of all of us, Gina. No, it doesn't work that way. So I speak my truth, what's for me. Please do not assign anything that I say to a group of people, and I will do the same for you. So please, so when you speak your truth. I'm not assigning everything that you say to your group of people. Experience discomfort, connect with your feelings. I'm going to talk a lot about that in a moment, but you can expect some discomfort because I'm probably going to talk and mention the terms white supremacy culture and ideology, and that always brings up something for people. It just depends. Be mindful of privilege. We want to recognize that privilege shows up in spaces in a number of ways. If you think of all of the isms of the world, then there is a space of privilege. So in some spaces, the gender identity and heteronormative spaces, we want to make sure that everyone gets the opportunity to speak, but we also want to be mindful of like decentering the dominant group so that the voices that don't get centered get an opportunity to speak. Maintain confidentiality. What's said here stays here, except that we're recording this one, so it's not going to stay here. So just know that what you say is being recorded here, and that our confidentiality is out in the world for this one. But it's typically one we use when we work in smaller groups and we're not being recorded. Move up and move back so no one dominates. In case you cannot tell, I am that person in the group who's always like got a lot to say. So I do my work to move back and leave room for people who move up, who need to move up or would like to. Listen resiliently. there's two things about listening resiliently that I really want you to focus on for our time today. Listen from a space of question. Listen from a space of, what can I connect to that? Is there some understanding for me? Versus listening to take a position or get oppositional or to, right? So we're just listening. And there's also some resiliency that's required when we do this work, because regardless of what your background is or where you come from or your cultural identities, some things are hard to hear. And so you want to know that it's going to take a little bit of resiliency to listen to some of the things that might be said. And then also know that silence is okay. So if you have nothing that you want to say in this session and all you want to do is listen, that's okay too. It is not required that you say something. The last one that's not on there is remember to breathe. I will stop us at times and just invite everyone to take a deep breath, because some concepts require us to slow down and take a deep breath. So those are our agreements for our time together today. If there's something you would like to add to what you see on the screen, please toss it into the chat and feel free. Okay, so now I am going to talk about emotions. So I have to presence this, because what happens when, I don't know, you all may have seen this, but if you start having conversations about race, there's some common emotions that come up. And this comes from the work of Gerald Wing Sue, and it's a book called Race Talk and the Conspiracy of Silence. But these common emotions that come up for people are coming up for people of color as well as white people. And when we don't acknowledge that we're having that emotion, you just move back from the conversation, right? If I get resentful and angry and frustrated, I might just step away, like, I'm not talking about this anymore. And I think maybe you've seen this. Or also on the other side, you may see defensiveness come up. Well, I don't see it that way. I don't think of it that way. This is not how I am. I'm not racist. This isn't like this. You're not talking to me. No, I'm not talking to you. So let's be very clear about our session today. This is not about individuals. This is about systems. This is about systems and ways of being and policies. And I love when I get to speak with the Democrats abroad, because there's an understanding of systems and policies. Policy is a big thing, right? So just know that if any of these emotions occur for you, it's absolutely natural, expected, and let it be okay. And if I say something and you feel an emotion, it's okay to like toss it into the chat and say, okay, that did make me feel a little bit frustrated.
Gina?
Totally okay. Yes.
Sorry, we have a comment in the chat box. Marjorie can't see the word breathe.
Yes, and I don't know what's happening with my slides, that the bottom part is not showing up. But
it's okay. I got it. Actually, I don't know why. I found it.
Okay, good.
I'm sorry. I'm here. I'm sorry. Yeah, it's back. I found it.
Okay, thank you.
I'm breathing. Okay.
Yeah. So, and we will take some deep breaths. So thank you, Marjorie. Thank you for that. Okay, I need a volunteer to read this quote for us while we spend our time together today. Anyone? Feel free to just unmute yourselves. I can't see your hands right now. Go ahead, Adrienne.
Okay, I'll have a go at it. It is not our work to force someone's growth to our liking. It is the work of love to admire the beauty before you, to give people a sense of safety to unfold, to keep each other company when drowning in anguish until the wave can balance out and our feelings can once again live in us. Ruth King.
Thank you so much. Thank you so much, Adrienne. Can you all just toss into the chat what words stand out from you from that quote? Just any words that stand out. I like to begin with this because it's just a way for us to get grounded. Love, safety, thank you. Sense of safety. Admire, thank you, Marjorie. Beauty, company, anguish, yes. Respect, love, safety. Drowning in anguish. Ooh, thanks, Claire. Force.
Unfold.
So, unfold. Ah, yes, beautiful. So the reason why I share this quote with you all, and this book is an amazing book by Ruth King. The reason why I share this quote with you is because I'm not here to convince you of anything. I'm not here to sell you, make you think the way that I think. If I'm doing my job right, I'm creating a space that you can actually unfold in your own understanding, not only of what critical race theory is, but of how institutionalized racism shows up and how we as individuals contribute or can alter it. So this, if I'm doing it right, you're going to have that sense of safety. And also to recognize that, you know what, when it gets hard, it does feel like drowning. It does feel like anguish. And if we're focusing on, thank you, Patrick, for putting that in there, the work of love, then we can move through this work in a way that allows us to all grow and allows room for everyone to have the experience they need to have. So before we dig in on what critical race theory is, actually, I'm going to start with this video here, which means that I'm going to need to stop sharing and share my screen again, because I did not share with the sound, and I want to do that because I really want you to, I want you to hear what someone else has to say about race theory and what it is. And let me know if you can't hear.
Let's just start with a basic definitional question. When you hear critical race theory over and over again, what should people understand? How do you define CRT?
So I first want to just make a distinction between CRT, which is a theoretical framework that I learned in graduate school and read about in graduate school, versus teaching about race and racism in American history critically. So critical race theory is a framework. It's a theoretical framework that was developed in the 1980s by legal scholars to help us understand how it is that structural and racial disparities endure in our society, and how that is actually engendered in some of our laws and policies. And so the idea was to get us to think systemically, as opposed to just thinking that racism manifests by individuals just mistreating each other, that there are actual structures in our society that create these different kinds of racial gaps and racial disparities economically, in terms of housing, in terms of education. And so that's what they do, is that they actually show us how the law, how laws that are supposed to be neutral actually can promulgate or support racial disparities. That's a theoretical framework. I think what we're talking about today, though, is some contestation and conflict over how you teach about race, racial hierarchies, critically, racism in schools and society. And so the two are being conflated.
And so when you hear people talking repeatedly about critical race theory, what is your thought?
Well, I hear people talking about critical race theory. I see that as a straw man for many communities, politicians particularly, trying to shape the knowledge base and what we teach students. I think that there is some fear about raising consciousness about structural inequality, about structural racism, because it does implicate many of our practices in our society. It indicates what we would have to do differently in government. And some of that is ideological, in terms of there's a lot of resistance to how we do things to be fairer and more just in our society. So, you know, there are a number of, I read a really good article just yesterday in the New Yorker about the origins of this conflict and who's behind it. And it's a concerted effort by many on the right to mitigate the extent to which we really augment and increase the understanding of racism in our society.
Okay, so what I would love from you all, and let me just make sure I got this to stop. I don't want the sound to keep going. What I would love from you all is, can you tell me what you got from that? I'm going to have a couple people raise hands and tell me what you got from that, what she was saying there. What did you pull from there?
That it's a concerted strategy, all the talk about critical race theory.
Mm-hmm. Thanks, Annie. Anyone else? Go ahead, Bridget. Brigitte? Is it Brigitte?
You can say Bridget, you can say Brigitte. I am not precious about how to pronounce my name because so many people have mispronounced it throughout my lifetime. Did she stop? Did she freeze for you too? Not just me? Okay. Personal. Okay, you're gonna have to say it again, Brigitte, because it got a little bit
garbled. Okay, sorry. That she learned it in graduate school
and that it's completely different than what they're treating or what they're teaching in schools. So they're teaching about history, and that it's not personal.
Thank you. And Peggy, did you want to add something?
Well, the idea of it being conflated, the teaching of it, and then that there's a fear about raising consciousness.
Thank you. Thank you. Yeah. Anyone else want to add anything?
That it's been somewhat politicized, quite frankly.
Absolutely. Absolutely. And as a school board member, I can tell you, I'm feeling the pressure of it being politicized. And I'm an educator, right? So as an educator, this is, I'm not teaching critical race theory in my classes every day. It doesn't work like that. I'm teaching accurate history, which is related, but not exactly the same thing, right? So where she said it's conflated is like a very accurate statement. So I'm going to share my screen again because I love, and I shared this quote in one of our other trainings that we did for Democrats Abroad. CRT is not a diversity and inclusion, right? Training. It's not like we're not out here like, okay, we're going to teach you how to do CRT now. It's not that, right? It's an academic pursuit, interrogating the role of race and racism, and how racism, how it is embedded in our structures and systems. So I'm going to go back up to the slides where I was before. Sorry, I've got things a little backwards today, but it's okay. I want to talk about, when we talk about racism, there is an idea that we're always talking about this interpersonal racism, right? If you look at the 4 quadrants on your screen there, and this comes from the work of Race Forward, but if you look at the 4 quadrants on your screen there, like interpersonal racism is the racism that on the bottom left that most people think about when we're talking about racism, right? Slurs, you're saying something negative to someone. And then there's also on the individual side, internalized racism. And as an educator, I can tell you that there are students who just will tell you, it's not, that's not for me. School's not for me. School's not made for me. Because, whatever reason they've internalized. But what we're talking about when we think about systems and how the systems operate are the systemic ways of racism showing up, which institutionally would be within inside of organizations, right? Inside of specific institutions. And then structurally is going to be across institutions. So I'm going to give you an example, and I would imagine that you've heard of redlining. And if you've been out of the country for a long time, I feel like redlining is probably our most simple example of how structural racism goes, and then how it affects schools, because I got to talk about school. That's what I do. So structural, how it's showing up in institutions, redlining is first and foremost blocking areas off so that only certain groups of people can live there. It's a very prevalent practice. It began back in the 60s. And so certain neighborhoods, I live in the city, I was right outside the city of Chicago, and Chicago is a very segregated city. And that was all intentionally done because areas were redlined, marked off, that certain people could live in certain areas. And then the property values in those areas were made to be less. Now, when you make property values less, and then the tax base becomes less for that area, and then those are the funds that fund schools. Think about multiple institutions that have been impacted by that. That's structural. That's what we're talking about. We're talking about structural. I'm going to get back to CRT in a second, but just get this foundational piece here about structural. So now now it really makes a difference what zip code you live in, whether you're going to get an education that's of quality, that has all the resources, right, that would be required for a school and for students to truly thrive. So then there's a number of policies in place along the lines of that redlining that created things that are in place. So not only the laws of redlining, but then the realtors and what their parameters they were given for who can live where. Then in addition to that, the banks not lending, and then the policies and that were in place that were legislated for certain areas and certain ways of being. Let's see, the chat pops up in there. Oh yeah, John Oliver, he does such a thorough job of, when he gets a topic, he does a really thorough job. So if you don't understand redlining, thank you for that, Brigitte. Check out John Oliver on YouTube, because he really does he lays it down. He does his research. I appreciate it. So that's, so that's what we're talking about when we think about structural and institutional racism. There are ways to address these things, but for structural, the way to address it is highlight history, right? We want to know the root causes. We want to know, like, if you're talking to people and they're not even aware that redlining exists, that's because they don't have the historical understanding of how our communities and cities got to be so segregated in the first place. We want to challenge racist myths and ideologies. And this is one of the pieces that I'm going to give you a little bit of information about. But the idea of white supremacy, I'm not talking about white nationalism. I'm not talking about any of that. I'm talking about the idea of white supremacy, that white is better. And it doesn't matter what country you go to, people who are light-skinned are more favored than people who are dark-skinned. That is an idea of white being better that has been permeated throughout the world. So we have to challenge that myth, right? We have to challenge that idea, but it's highly embedded, and it's embedded in policies as well. And then challenging multiple institutions and addressing their actions, right? I ran to become a school board member so that I could be one of the people who says, okay, well, this is what we're seeing in our community. This is what the data is showing us about opportunities that are available to students. And this is how I can impact that. Oh, we're going to, and in my community, we've done two things. We've removed police officers from our schools. And one of the reasons was because the students told us that they did not feel safe with police officers in the schools. That was the main reason. The main reason was the students said that they felt policed with police officers in schools. And I will tell you that lo and behold, 2 years later of having no police officers in the schools, things haven't gotten like crazy, and nothing has been off the charts like everyone expected it to be. Oh, you're going to take the police out? It's going to get worse. No, that has not happened. We actually replaced our police officer with more social emotional support, right? A trauma interventionist, more social workers. Like, we use those funds to provide those supports that are required. And then the other piece is we have decided to detrack our curriculum for our freshman students, so that a test is not determining how you can succeed through high school, or if you're able to take certain courses, specifically honors courses. Knowing that, and being able to get into great colleges and universities requires that you have a good GPA, but that you also have some honors courses, right? To get into Ivy League schools, you really got to have some honors courses there. So making it possible for all students to be able to take honors courses in their freshman year was a policy, and then we adapted the content so that it could be scaffolded, so the students that don't have those skills are able to do that, right? As an educator, I can say we know how to do that, and so we did. Now, what does all of this have to do with critical race theory? Well, not that much, except if you look at everything I've just said and you study it over time, then that's what critical race theory is. Take all of these policies, all these things that we're doing. I'm truly like excited to see what is critical race theory going to look like 10 years from now, after we have real data on our policy changes that I've been a piece of. What are the theories that are going to come forward from that around how we dismantle systemic racism in schools, specifically in the school that I'm in, right? So all of these things that I'm saying, looking at them from a theoretical lens, evaluating them, analyzing them, and having an academic pursuit that would say, oh, this is what this has demonstrated, to having research and papers and all those great things that come from higher education, right? Spaces where they say, oh, we looked at all of these different things, and now we can see this is how systemic racism has shown up in the system. Does that give you a better idea, at least, of what it kind of can look like on the ground and where that comes from? And I would love to take some comments from anyone who has a comment or a question. Brigitte, go ahead.
Sorry, I've got a question. I have been deep in documentaries Sorry, I'm getting a message on my internet. My connection's unstable. So let me know if this doesn't come across. I've been deep in documentaries, and I know that documentaries are skewed. But you talked about the systemic, like about people being scared or about people not wanting this to come out. And is it, I'm just thinking, are they afraid of people being aware of the systemic racism because then it threatens their power structure? And instead of us living unconsciously and just going along with it, we are now aware and we can stop it? Because with all of the stuff I've been watching, it's like I really feel like the North won the Civil War, but the South won Reconstruction. And all of these laws and all of these things were done to keep these white men in power and to keep minorities down.
Brigitte, you've been watching a lot of documentaries that are like hitting along the lines of, here's what I'm going to tell you. I am not a critical race theorist. I'm not. It's not my skill set. It's not my background. I'm a teacher, right? And I teach kids. But what you're talking about, and from the framework and the lens that you're speaking, is the idea that there are some systems in place that maintain certain systems of power and control. And we can leave it to the critical race theorists to give us information about research that demonstrates what all of those spaces are and how it shows up in our society. And if we do that properly and we listen to the research and I like to say like the social science of how things have been developed and how they show up, we do hear that theme on and on again. If you look at data, you can look at data from any school in the United States any public school in the United States of America right now, and pretty much what you're going to see is that the students of color, Black, Indigenous, and students of color tend to have lower scores and be disproportionately disciplined. That's not happening because that's not happening accidentally, right? There are ideas that have gone into that, and there may be policies that are upholding that, right? We look continually at what policies might be upholding this, that we're seeing more Black students be sent to the office for defiance and disrespect. What policy is making that a thing? When we know that Black students are no more defiant nor disrespectful than white students or any other students of color. We know that for a fact. At least I can say that for a fact, being in the classroom, having been in the classroom. I actually coach teachers now, but having been in the classroom for a number of years, I can tell you, it's not any different. So what policies and procedures are upholding that? And how do we understand it critically? I don't know if I got it, what you were saying, Brigitte, but I hope I did. Yeah. Other comments or questions? Okay. I wanna show you another video because this one is specifically about education, and I really appreciated how they tied it, how this person tied it together, and it's from Ed Week. So give me a second to get to that, and I will share my screen. And don't worry, we're going to leave some time for questions and comments at the end. In about, like, I would say 10, 15 minutes, I'll be done presenting, Jazz. So I hope that's enough time. And it might be shorter. We'll see. Depends on how our conversation goes. Make sure the sound is shared.
Educators are facing questions about critical race theory.
You can hear? Yeah.
But what is it and why is it under attack? Critical race theory is an academic and legal concept that's been around for 4 decades. The core idea is that racism isn't just about individual prejudice or bias, it's woven into public policies and laws, even those that seem to be race blind. Single-family zoning, for example, makes it harder to build affordable housing and further desegregation efforts. In K-12 education, people have applied these concepts to patterns of student discipline and tracking systems. Because racism is part of this context of everyday life, people, white or non-white, who don't intend to be racist can nevertheless make choices that fuel racism, the theory says. It's important to note that critical race theory isn't a program or a training or a curriculum. It's a way of thinking about the world. Still, it's controversial because critics, largely though not exclusively conservatives, allege that this way of thinking fuels division or pits people of color against white people. Lawmakers in more than a dozen states have already passed or are debating legislation to ban the use of critical race theory or divisive topics in the classroom. Sometimes critical race theory is conflated with anti-racism and social justice, which are more common terms and concepts used and taught in schools. This might mean that parents or school board members could use the term critical race theory to challenge curriculum and lessons. Proposals to ban critical race theory could have a chilling effect on what teachers teach about certain topics. They might worry that teaching the full history of the removal of Indigenous peoples, or the Civil War, or the Tulsa race massacre will land them in trouble with parents or administrators. While some district officials have issued mission statements or resolutions, or they've spoken about changes in their policies using some of the discourse of critical race theory, it's actually not clear to what extent educators are explicitly teaching these concepts, or even using curriculum materials or other methods that implicitly draw on them. This is a really complex topic, so we encourage you to look at Education Week's resources at edweek.org/race to learn more.
So thank you for that, Joel. I think you put it in the chat. Yes, we will. I'll make all these links available to you all, so don't worry about that. You will have access. And my next question actually is, what implications can you see in both of those videos, right? And what's been shared with you already? What implications can you see that are coming up for us as we navigate in the individual spaces that we're in? I'll give you a couple seconds to think about that, because it's quite a question, right? What implications can you see based on what you've heard about the spaces that you're in and your voice in policy, as well as, you know, what you see happening where you are?
Well, a simple comment would be resistance.
Say more, Patrick. Say more about that.
Resistance by those who feel their power, their space is being invaded.
Yeah. Thank you. There is a resistance, right? There's a resistance to having the conversations, and we're seeing it in school boards, and school board members actually being threatened that they're going to come to their homes if you let the teachers teach about certain aspects of history. That I have colleagues who have told me that their administration has told them, well, there's been something passed that you can't teach anything that would make anyone uncomfortable, especially white students. You can't teach anything that's going to make white students uncomfortable. It's like, oh, well, what? Okay. I see Adrian's hand. Go ahead, Adrian.
That was actually the perfect segue because of the comment that I was going to make, because, you know, as a Black adult, a Black woman, and also, you know, at an age where I am in my life, I just think it's incomprehensible that an argument like that would be even considered legitimate, that you were going to throw content. We've already been thrown under the bus historically. There has not been care for our people, and now to even say that openly. So I do think that that's always been there in our society, but you know, with Trump as president, people really feel that they can say things more openly than they used to, and I just think it's such a crass statement to say, oh well, we want our kids to be protected, and we don't care what happens to your children or how this impacts them. So actually, I had a question for you, which maybe you want to address later, or at your, you know, whenever you feel like it is. What are you experiencing with the children in your school now, and particularly the Black kids and other children of color, as they see this debate going on in the public sphere? You know, are they, yeah.
Thank you for that question, Adrian. I'm happy to answer that now. But I saw a hand go up and then go back down, so I don't recall whose it was, but if you want to jump in a moment. So let me tell you what I'm seeing. I can tell you what I've seen. Thank you. I can tell you what I've seen over the course of the past 6 to 8 years in education. What I've seen is students get more and more hostile towards each other. What I've seen is students, I've seen an increase in bullying. I've seen an increase in I'm right and you're wrong, and in order for me to win, I will do whatever it takes. I've seen an increase in all of those things. And I've seen in the last 2 years, I have seen students be really willing to say, maybe this isn't working for us. How can we talk to each other? I'm so highly encouraged, I have to be honest. And it's been so challenging that I'm like, I don't know, like as an adult in some of the spaces, it's been very challenging for me, but I'm highly encouraged by what I'm hearing the students say. First of all, Black students, without a doubt, are not holding back on this system is not built for me and not working for me, and I need you to address it. They have come to at least my board numerous times, and we have a very open dialogue and conversation. I need you to tell me what is the experience like in the school, so please tell me, and then we will work on it. So students are getting way more vocal about, hey, this doesn't work, and we don't like it, and we want to know how to make it different. And then what I've seen this past year, I'm actually in an elementary school. I'm a middle school teacher at heart. I've taught middle school and been in middle schools mostly, but I'm back in an elementary school again. And what I'm seeing from the students in elementary, you know, they're the students who want to be confrontational and difficult and maintain like ideas that would be contrary to unity are fewer and fewer. And the students that want to say, hey, wait a minute, no, we make sure that everybody has a voice here. Just because your skin color is different, I've actually heard a student say that, just because your skin color is different, we need to make sure that they don't treat you differently, like as low as 3rd grade. So I'm encouraged by what I'm hearing there from young people, and the need for us as adults to encourage them even more to maintain that. I also want to point out for anybody who knows educators in an education sphere, Learning for Justice used to be Teaching Collins' website, Learning for Justice, and I'll drop it in the chat. They have a series of social justice standards that we can now teach. And the social justice standards actually are teaching about identity and inclusion and just a number of things that are just so beneficial. Now, in some states, those standards cannot be taught. Like it's been legislated out that they cannot teach those standards. I happen to be in Illinois, right? Illinois is not one of those states. So that's not happening where I am. But my colleagues in other states for sure are being told, no, do not teach those social justice standards. And then the question I always push back with is, are we not to teach children how to respect one another? Are we not to teach children to understand cultural differences? Because I thought that's what, like, we're teaching them to be good citizens, and being a good citizen means that you listen, you don't have to agree, but you don't have to be disagreeable, right? So I thought, so Adrian, to your question, I hope I answered it somewhat. I'm seeing a number of different things happening. I did see a huge, we all saw a huge uptick in the bullying and the hostility and the violence toward each other. And now it's starting to taper a little bit. And I'm not in a Pollyanna way, of course. I don't expect it to be perfect, but I expect us to stay engaged in the process. And I expect us to, as educators, advocate for making sure that social justice standards are being taught. I expect us as educators to say, hey, we need to, you know, there are things that I expect us as educators, and a social studies teacher, that's what I went to school to become, right? So I expect that civics and social studies become a priority in education again, right? Because those are the spaces that we're missing because we've been testing so hard that we've been focusing on math and reading. And it's like, but we really need to understand how things got to be the way that they are. Tanji, did you have your hand up, and did you want to?
Yeah, yes, I did. Thank you. You actually answered answered the question when you were speaking to Adrian, but I guess my thoughts were, the first thing, you know, this really is about power, right? You know, about the white majority, if you will, where the rules, the systems, you know, I'm in financial services. I'm very familiar with redlining. I'm very familiar with banks not lending, you know, and all the things that you've spoken about. So it really is about the power, right? But I also was very curious, and this is all from, say adults, politicians, whatever, people are very vocal about not wanting to speak about critical race theory or, history, right? And I was just really curious as to the students and how they, to your point, were actually reacting to, because even in London, the American School of London, there was a contingent of people that were basically against teaching critical race theory. I mean, this was unbelievable. I read the letter that they sent to the head teacher, and this is in London, Americans in London, spouting just really incorrect information, about teaching history or, understanding the differences. So I'm sorry, I'm saying a lot here, but I guess hopefully there's hope with the, younger students becoming more tolerable or trying to understand the differences, in the classroom.
You're making perfect sense, Kanji, and you're leading me right into the last two pieces of what I'm going to talk about with you all. It's like, what can we do, right? What can we do? Because the questions and the comments are coming fast and serious. Like, don't think that they're not. Like, I am in Oak Park, okay? Oak Park is an intentionally integrated community. They were one of the first in the 80s to be an intentionally integrated community, and we are getting pushed back. When we said we were going to detract the curriculum, the pushback came hard and furious. And it required, first of all, us making sure that we elected the right people to the school board to get those policies changed. But it also required that the people who were very vocal, that they believed that this equitable change would be important, actually spoke up and spoke out, that they said it, that they voiced, hey, no, we're not, we said that we wanted to do this and this is why we're doing this. And that people actually use their voice to say that. So that's the first piece I want to say is, the youth have always been the drivers of change. They just have been, right? The youth have been the drivers of change. But as adults, we have policy, we have things that we must do to not only support their voice, but for us. So when I think about, because you saw on my last slide, it was teaching accurate history. And this is what I want to take away from this. This is what I would love for you to take away from our time together, is that you support the teaching of accurate history. And when we teach accurate history, that means that more than one viewpoint is included in teaching accurate history. That means that the viewpoints of the people who were conquered, that the Native and Indigenous peoples, that their information gets included in the narrative of the conversation, so that we're teaching, oh, well, this is actually what it was like for the Indigenous people of that land when colonization started to happen. Because there are ideas about colonization that have seeped into all of our ways of being, and we need to understand that as well. So the first thing that I have on there is mindfulness, because we got to be aware. You got to be aware. Like, if you're white, you have to be aware of how you're showing up in a space and how much you can utilize your voice and your privilege to ensure that we're putting policies in place, teaching accurate history, and using your voice. As much as I would love to say that when I show up in a space and when my colleague Francis shows up in a space, people treat us equally, I can tell you right now, we've shown up to present, and they have actually asked us, well, Francis, I think that you all should really even out who does the speaking. Like, maybe Francis should speak more, and maybe Gina, you should speak less. Like, they've actually said that to us. So it's not so it happens in real time. So being aware, right? And in that moment, of course, Francis always, anytime something like this comes up, Francis is like, no, it's set up exactly as we need it to be. And I'm curious why you would think that Gina should speak less, right? Because she knows her place and privilege, her voice in that space may carry more weight with those people than my voice. The next thing is relationships and communication. Like, critical, that the relationships that we have with the people in the spaces of power, the people who are holding offices for us, that we need to be communicating to them. I will tell you, I do a fair amount of lobbying on behalf of public education, And in doing that lobbying, it's the relationships that I have with those legislators around the topics that pertain to public education and ensuring that they know what I expect and what I need and what we expect and what we need in classrooms. And the last one that I have there is focusing on fostering inclusive policies and advocating for them. Policy, everything is in the policy. Yes, thank you, Adrian. I'm sorry, I got distracted by that chat, right? She said that she's intentionally asking Democrats abroad's leaders to reference the term critical race theory accurately. Absolutely, absolutely. Because there is a narrative being told about what critical race theory is, and hopefully some of the information I shared with you helps to dispel what it actually is that they're trying to say it is. So it's not that, right? So fostering inclusive policies, which means advocating for them, writing, calling, speaking out to legislators, and voting on the policies and advocating for those spaces. Now, is it easy to do? No, I'm going to say no, it's not easy to do, because someone is going to, I'm going to stop sharing for a second. There's an idea that we have the zero-sum game, and I don't know if any of you have read The Sum of Us by Heather Bradshaw, I think it is, but I want to highly recommend that book.
Yes.
Yes, right?
Yeah.
I want to highly recommend that, because this is not a zero-sum game, and just because what we know is that all students benefit from having Black teachers. White students benefit from having Black teachers too, right? Not just Black students. It's critical for Black students to have Black teachers so they can see themselves. But white students benefit on the whole, and it's important for us to know that, and then advocate for policies that will increase the amount of teachers of color we have in our schools, Black teachers specifically. And if we're not doing that, then we're losing out. But there's an idea that, oh, if there's more Black teachers, there's not going to be room for enough white teachers. Why would you think that? We have a huge public education system that has room for all of the teachers that are needed. So if we have to stop thinking of it as that zero-sum game. Well, more for one means less for another. I will say, though, that the idea that is what happens when we change that policy, there were a number of white families that came and said, this is going to mean that my kid who worked hard is not going to have the advantage anymore. It's like, well, it's not that they don't have the advantage, it's just that someone else gets to take the same course as them and have an opportunity. So it's reframing, and just as Adrian put in the chat there, right? Making sure, yeah. And we have a teacher we definitely are short on teachers. There is a teacher shortage. The struggle is so real. We can't even get substitute teachers, you all. We need people to be teachers. And my last slide for you all is this piece here. People don't learn from experience. People learn on their experience. And so the teacher in me can't resist this, to make sure that you think about reflecting on your experiences today, reflecting on the experiences of your life on a daily basis, especially if you're white, reflecting on the experiences of your life on a daily basis that might be different for someone else, and how you can advocate for things to be different. Now, I usually go back to this slide to end this out, just because I know that it's challenging, but it is not our work to force someone else's growth to our liking. It's the work of love, to see the beauty before you, to give people a sense of safety to unfold, and to keep each other company when we're drowning, so that the anguish can balance down enough, and that we can be together in ways that we need to be to make change happen in our society and for future generations to come. So thank you all so much for giving me time to present. I'm open for questions, and I hope that it was useful. I hope you've got a little bit more understanding about how this conversation is being shaped in ways that make it so you can go and speak to it in an accurate way. Thanks, Jess, for having me.
Thank you very, very much, Gina. It is always a great pleasure having you with us with DA and also with the Global Black Caucus. And I totally like how engaging this conversation already has been. And normally what we do is we do star hands up into the chat box, but I like this open format in this whole context. And I would like to continue that as well. So if you have any comments, remarks, questions for Gina, just either raise your hand or just get going, because we should use this space to talk about things. And yeah, why don't we dive into this a little bit more? I know initially we wrote onto the website, bring your discomfort into this learning space. Did anybody feel discomfort entering this space today? Or maybe lack of wisdom entering this space today? Chat box here. Okay.
Yeah, I just added the link for that one video. But Peggy, it looks like you unmuted.
Yeah. I think what I brought with me is exactly what you spoke about last, Gina, was the idea of reflecting on your experience. Growing up in a very racist environment, but still and enjoying all the privilege. My question is, because I think that it's taken me a lifetime to unpack all of that stuff and try to figure out how I can help. So I guess my question here is, how does critical race theory address, for example, and I realize that it's not about individuals, but the societal racism that families and circles of friends perpetuate among themselves in these, sort of in neighborhoods, for example, and in churches and places like that, where it's not necessarily fully expressed, but it's there, and you learn it as a child, and your friends learn it. How do you address that in critical race theory? Because I think that a lot of that is what is happening, this learned superiority, supremacy, that you get, it starts at home, and then you get it in your peers, and not just institutionally, but societally.
It's a great question, Peggy, and I'm going to challenge you to be that person that always asks the question, right? And I think, Jess, wasn't another previous session where I gave you all the questions to ask, like, how you dig in a conversation with people. So here's the thing. My sister is white. My mom is white. My dad is Black. So I'm a Black woman. I identify as Black because that's who I am. But it's very interesting having white family and being a Black person, let me tell you. Because when my sister shows up in places, people will say things to her that they would not say if I was standing next to her, right? She always has to tell people, she calls people on their stuff all the time. Does it make it extremely uncomfortable for her? Yeah. But I want to encourage you and everyone, like, when you're with your family and they start the conversation, is to dig into questions. Questioning helps to start to break that down. But you're right, Peggy. Like, what we're seeing systemically is coming from individuals, like, so it just builds, right? It's like individuals having conversations, perpetuating ideas. Now we have to break those down and keep the conversation going. But if we stop the conversation with the people that are closest to us, they're gonna shut down and say no, then that's just wrong, period. So we want to encourage conversations that are questioning conversations. Like, tell me more about where that idea came from, right? Why do we do it this way? Can you explain why that thought process is something that our family has always thought? Like, when you question people into a conversation, it helps so that you're not having to, it doesn't put people on the defensive, and they're not necessarily having to defend where they are, but having to have their own deeper understanding of where it comes from. and that deeper understanding of where it comes from. If you go spouting off and calling people out all the time, everybody's going to just back away from you. And as soon as you show up, they're like, oh, here she comes. I know, because I don't even call people out, but sometimes I walk into spaces and they're like, oh, Gina's here. So they know I'm going to ask them hard questions. But, you know, it's giving people the space, like I said, to unpack their own questions, their own ideas. And I have racists in my family, and being able to help them unpack their ideas, not my most favorite thing to do, I can tell you, but to ask them the questions into it, right? Like, so tell me why you think that it's important that we get a picture with only these members of our family and not all of the members of the family. Tell me your thinking behind that, instead of, why did you put all the Black people on one side of the picture? Because they're not going to, right? They're not going to hear that. They're not going to hear that. But can you explain to me why our picture is set up, why you would want to set up our picture this way? And then it makes people think, oh, maybe we shouldn't do that. I don't know, Peggy, if that's helpful, but it's like, I feel like calling people into a conversation, questioning is much easier. And now you're being tasked to be the person that does it all the time. And I'm seeing Adrian's comment and Tanji agreeing with her, that even in Democrats abroad, it doesn't matter where you are, people, we are in systems of colonization and white supremacy ideology. That's just foundational. It's not like, oh, white people are bad. Please do not misinterpret my words, people. I always have to say this. This is not what I'm saying. That is not what this is about. This is about an idea that white is better than everything else. And how do we break that down in all the spaces that we're in? Because it's going to occur everywhere. If you have an organization that's over a certain amount of years old, say 100, 150, there's going to be some stuff. There's going to be some culture and ideology pieces. And Lee, maybe what we could do is, I do a session on white supremacy, culture, and ideology, and maybe we could do a session on like breaking down what that actually looks like and is in places so people understand it when they see it. It might be a thought. But I know that we're at time. It's 11:04. People have busy lives, and I'm in Florida. So the sun is calling.
There are actually really, really good questions also in the chat box, or comments as well. And there's one more that points out, and that is probably of a lot of interest there, before we let everybody else to enjoy their Sunday. How can, this question came from Brigitte, how can we aid education when the abbreviation CRT brings so much anger?
Yeah, first, don't be angry yourself, first and foremost. Okay, don't approach it from anger. Approach it from love, right? With the recognition that most people who are saying that they don't want CRT, they don't even know what they're saying. They don't even know what CRT is, right? So instead of approaching it with like, yeah, well, you don't even know what you're talking about, just like ask them the question. What is it specifically that you don't want taught? What don't you want taught? And then to support educators, get as much as you can, reach out to school boards where, the places that you vote in back home, reach out to those places and say, hey, we support teachers teaching the truth. We support teaching accurate history and letting people know that that's important. Like your voices in this are going to be really important because there's a small group, I feel like where I am too, there's a small group of people that always have a lot to say. They're very loud, but the people who are like, oh, I really don't agree with them, don't say very much. Please, if you don't agree, please say it all and say it regularly. Say, I support teachers teaching accurate history, and say it everywhere and say it to everybody and say it to the decision makers, the policy makers.
Gina, do you have time for one more question from Teresa?
Sure, of course.
Thank you.
Thank you very much for doing this. I truly enjoyed it. So I completely support that this is systemic. And that was the first thing that popped out with both of the videos that you showed immediately, that it came from academia, it was legally based, and the idea was to create awareness that this was systemic structural problem. My question is, what can we do individually? Now, I know you touched upon it, because some of us were just born with fabulous mothers that were just amazing. That was my case, thank God. But I will say that experience also can be really, really important, because in one scholastic year when I was 13, I went from a school that was LA, Los Angeles. So I went to a school where whites were minority, and I am white. I'm just saying that because my picture isn't up there. I would be, I present as being obvious Caucasian, Italian American. And then I went from a school, it was, I think it was 40% Black, and maybe about 30 to 40% Hispanic, Samoan. And so that's why I say I was in a minority at that school. A few months later, we went back to Seattle, and I was in West Seattle. And again, I was in a really great school. It was probably about 45% Black. And then I went to rural Seattle, where it was all white, basically. There was one African-American girl and one Japanese-American girl, and all the rest of the entire student body was white. All this in one school year. And I have to say that I thoroughly enjoyed being in Los Angeles, and just my circle of friends were the United Nations. I mean, I had Chinese American, Samoan, African American, Puerto Rican, Hispanic. I was the only white girl in my group of like 10 best friends. And I want to cry a little bit, because just recently, my girlfriend, who was the only Black girl in our school, about 4 months ago, she sent me this wonderful message, how grateful she was that I'd invited her over to my house to play and to have dinner with my family, and that my younger brother had been totally awesome to her younger brothers too by doing the same thing. And we were the only ones in school that did that. And I had absolutely no idea until like 4 or 5 months ago, like 40 years later, how important that was to her. And it was like a no-brainer in our family. Everyone was welcome in our household. And so what can we do as individuals, as mothers? Because mothers have the ears of their children, usually, as mothers and grandmothers, parents and grandparents, to make that individual impact.
Teresa, I love your story and your question. What I'm going to say, now this is just me, my perspective. What I'm going to say is, don't shy away from the conversations with your kids.
Don't what?
Don't shy away from the conversation with your children.
Oh, yeah.
But to me, that's the most important thing that families can do.
Yes.
If the students ask, if your kids are asking the questions and they're like, not to shy away from it. Like what I've watched so many times is in various places, people say, a kid will point out, look, that's a Black person. And then the parents are like, don't say that. It's like, no, why wouldn't you say that? The student is the kid is just identifying the characteristic of a person. If you saying it's not okay to talk about that means that we can't talk about that people are different, right? So your story is speaks right to let us be inclusive. Let us do the things that would include making sure that the spaces that we are in charge of are inclusive. Let our children know that those spaces can be inclusive, and not to shy away from it when it comes up. That's what my thoughts, but it's just.
Yeah, I'm just wondering if there was some sort of like, I don't know, training or tips or things that we can be, all sharing with one another, so that parents and grandparents, know, how they can make their children inclusive, and not be, victimized by other people's narrow thinking.
There's a lot of literature out there around that, Teresa. So I'm going to leave that to you.
Thank you.
But what I want to say is, there's no handbook. Okay, I just want to say this. I've done trainings with different spaces, especially at university level trainings that I've done with faculty. And a number of people have said, Gina, can you just give me the handbook? Like, is there like a toolbox or a handbook on the things that I can say or need to say, or when I need to say them and how I say them? And I'm like, no, there's not. There's no handbook. Okay, there's no handbook. There's no like, this is what you say when someone says this. There's no handbook. What it is if we have decided that the spaces that we are in and who we are going to be inclusive spaces, and I'm just going to broaden this out beyond race, if we have decided that our spaces are going to be inclusive spaces for different abilities, for different gender identities and sexual orientations, for people of different races and cultures, if we have personally decided that our space is going to be that, then that means that we have to interrogate every activity that's going on in our space on a regular basis to say, is it this? Is it inclusive? Am I doing those things? Am I modeling those things? Are the words that I'm saying being words that are inclusive, right? Are the thoughts that I'm thinking, are they inclusive? Like, we have to do our work if that's what we're going to be, but there's no handbook for it. So just so you know, there's no handbook. You just got to keep practicing. And then guess what? I'm just going to say one more thing. You're going to mess up, okay? You're going to mess it up. You are going to commit a microaggression. I did it again just the other day, okay? Like,
oh my gosh.
I commit microaggressions because guess why? This is like learning a language, and you don't learn a language overnight. I'm learning how to do things the right way. I actually use the term powwow in a way with my Indigenous friends. I use the term in a way that I should not have. I know that a powwow is a sacred ceremony, and then I used it flippantly, like, hey, I know you don't want to powwow right now. And they're like, Gina. And I said, oh, Gina, how dare you, right? Like, because we're all learning how to be on this path together. You're going to make mistakes. Know that you're going to make mistakes. But here's the thing. If somebody comes up to me and they say something that I find offensive as a Black woman, I'm not going to, first of all, I'm not letting you off the hook. But I am going to let you know how it affected me and how I felt and what I would like for you to do differently, right? And maybe I might suggest something, but it doesn't become my work to teach you. But at the same time, it's my space to, okay, but we're learning, and I know that you're learning too. So let us keep learning together. And that's what I got.
That was so powerful. Thank you so much. I never even imagined actually your example. I have Native American friends, and using the word powwow, I wouldn't have thought, see, there you go.
Right, exactly. There's a lot of terms that we use flippantly that we're not aware of, right? So
absolutely.
So interrogate your language, interrogate everything, friends. That's what we have to do. We have to, if we're going to really cultivate those spaces, we have to interrogate everything that we're doing on a regular basis. And maybe we don't say something every single time that we hear someone say something, but we make sure that we note it and we go back and address it somehow.
Just this comment that you shared has just been so great for me, because it reminded me when I was in 8th grade and the teacher was complaining that some of the kids looked like the mafia was after them. And being Italian American, I remember I perked up. I was the only Italian girl in that class. And I perked up and I thought, the mafia, of course, my family's not part of the mafia, but I knew it was a bad thing. And I remember the teacher turned all red. She got a little bit embarrassed. But I think that's a great rule for us to always keep in mind. Watch our language.
Well, it's the language, is it the language and all of that. And Brigitte, you put something in the chat about the intention behind it. And I wanted to just be mindful about intention. I might not have an intention to hit you in the head if we're playing Frisbee, but sometimes if I throw the Frisbee and it hits you it might hit you in the head. I didn't mean to do it, but you still got hurt in your head. So intention, right? Like, so we need to be mindful that, like, I did not intend to harm my colleagues with the powwow, with the use of that term inappropriately, but I did, right? So we have to be really mindful. So yeah, I could go, Jazz, I could go on. So I really, it'll be hard for me to stop. I'm a teacher, they'll give me a platform, you all.
Well, again, thank you, Teresa, for that great question. And again, thank you very, very much, Gina, for joining us today and spreading your knowledge. And I want to circle back to what you just said. Let's never stop learning together. That is a great statement, and it's some great final words, because every day is an opportunity for us to grow as human beings. And again, thank you very, very much for everybody also for attending and also for participating so actively with great questions and comments and not being fearful being a part of this journey that we are on this together. There's nothing more for us to say. Get informed, stay inspired, execute your fundamental right to vote, and never stop learning together. Gina, it was a great pleasure. Thank you again so very much.
Thanks, Jazz. Thanks, everyone. Thank you for
Thank
being
you.
here.
It was beautiful. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Thank you. Thanks, Gina. Always good to see you.
Yes, thank you.
Excuse
And
me.
a great Sunday to each and all of you. Bye. Take care.
Take
Next
care.
time.
Take care, everyone.
Bye.
Bye.
Bye, Joe.